In one of these lectures many years ago when I was subbing for Dr. Waters, and I had about 5 of you here. Not of you, because you weren't all here.
We pay them to protect their life and property. And
are we good?
We're running.
Okay, we're running late, so we probably better start.
Whether they do or don't, it's only to put on a phony front. They don't have any obligation to.
Okay, we're going to start.
No, we already started.
Okay.
That's okay. I'm half asleep tonight, so as I say, if I fall asleep, wake me up. That's when you know you got a boring lecture, when the guy giving it falls asleep. All right, we're on page 41. And of course, the key point to remember is that the political system you get depends on what your conception of human nature is. So from the standpoint of a materialist, you are simply an individual. You're part of a herd, basically, and may be treated as such. And of course, as such, you are subordinate to the whole completely, even if it entails your extermination or liquidation for the sake of the whole, as we've seen too often in the 20th century. Political atomism, which can result from affirming only the spiritual, results in a government that doesn't do very much. This would be libertarianism in the extreme. That's why it says here a government that really doesn't govern. It only protects and protects society as a whole and protects the individual's ability to act freely. But beyond that, it really doesn't have much more that it's concerned about. So if you emphasize only the personal, I don't want to see individuality, but the personal freedom of the, I'm trying not to say individual, but you wind up with a situation where you have complete autonomy for people to do anything they want to do, and government's job is just sort of to stay out of your way and make sure that you don't bother somebody else. But short of that, you're free to do anything. And this is why libertarianism in its extreme form would say, I believe that the American Constitution has only 2 functions. One is to conduct affairs of state, and the other is to protect and defend the homeland. And beyond that, you're on your own. So under that model, there would be really no objection to things like the use of illicit drugs. And of course, it also would tend to get identified with allowing abortion and homosexuality and homosexual marriages or anything you want to have, because there really isn't any standard beyond the individual autonomy. But that is to not understand the complexity of human nature, because we are spiritual and material beings at the same time. And as such, as material, we are subordinate to the group, but as spiritual, we transcend the group. So we have certain inalienable rights, unalienable rights, which are given to us by our Creator and which government must respect. But at the same time, the proper understanding of government is not simply to protect individual autonomy, but also to promote the common good. So there is such a thing as a common good. There are noble ventures of the human spirit that are to be not only protected, but encouraged by government, even to the point of holding philosophy classes, preferably even subsidizing them. Although the problem with subsidizing, as you know, the moment you get subsidized, you have regulations and control. So this is a delicate balancing act that we're always confronting. Which brings us to point G on page 41, something that I'm sure many of you, if not all of you, are already quite familiar with, and that is the great principle of subsidiarity, which actually I believe is derived from the popes in their social encyclicals, Quadragesimo Anno and Rerum Novarum, which establishes an overweening principle that we always have to pay attention to. And that is, you never want a larger unit of government doing for a smaller unit what the smaller unit can do for itself. And we can take this all the way down to the point of taking your garbage out. I mean, if you really wanted to pay the government to do it, they could come into your home and wrap the garbage for you and take it out to the truck. We don't normally do that. On the other hand, we consider it a social convenience to have the garbage picked up at the curbside and taken away someplace that we don't even want to know about. So there's a balance achieved here between what we can do for ourselves and what we don't either want to do for ourselves or what can be done more efficiently by a larger unit. And this runs all the way up and down the scale of government. Obviously, one of the big objections to Obamacare is the fact that it's big government written even bigger, that it would, left unchecked, allow the government to take over the smallest details of our private lives and control everything we do from conception to grave, even as we are now seeing to the point of interfering with the private religious consciences of people who object to some of its programs. But this is what happens when you have government in control of everything. And of course, one of the problems in a secular society is that when government controls everything, the principles of governance are secular, and therefore they're not about to countenance or to recognize and respect individual persons and their religious liberty, their privacy of conscience, and so forth. And this is one extreme. You can see we're getting this because of a kind of, if you look back a page here, I'm trying to find the right word, what is called positive state absolutism. Sure, we live in a democracy, more precisely a republic, but if living in a republic, the people who are running the republic decide to enact laws, even if the people enact laws which make the republic all powerful and taking over and violating the inalienable rights of individual citizens, then effectively you've already got a police state. The fact that you don't have technically a dictator at the top does not mean that you're not basically in what in all practical terms is a police state, because the government is controlling everything. Police, remember, is from the Greek polis, means the city. The city controls everything. And that's fundamentally what you have. It doesn't matter the form of government. A king could do that. A dictator, a despot, or even a republic or a parliament. If they enact too many laws, if they enact laws that control every aspect of our lives, if they enact laws that violate basic human rights, what does it matter what form of government you have? And that's why, conversely, as we'll see, it doesn't matter what kind of government you have. If it does respect human rights, if it respects the principle of subsidiarity, if it is properly governed, you could have a benign dictatorship. Well, no, normally, why don't we sanction that? Well, if you found me a perfect dictator, I think I'd say fine. You know, if you do everything I want him to, why object? Our problem is we don't trust any individual with that kind of power, and with rather good historical precedent to guide us. So, second best, we establish some kind of a republican form of government where we elect representatives and they represent the people, because it gets a little inefficient to have everybody voting on everything all the time. That was the social contract theory that was espoused by the French, I can't remember his name. Who was it? Rousseau. Rousseau's idea was everybody votes on everything, which is fine if you've got a very tiny village, but it doesn't work too well for 300 million Americans or 30 million Canadians. you have to have some kind of a representative form of government. But the thing to bear in mind is it isn't the exact form of the government that matters, it's whether the government operates in conformity with natural law, promoting the common good, but recognizing individual rights, and doing so assiduously, carefully, and above all, applying that principle of subsidiarity, which means that you don't have the larger unit doing what a smaller unit can do. First of all, it's inefficient. I mean, if you want to know whether to put a road out here on Military, if you want to decide whether to pave the road, who should decide this? Some bureaucrat in Washington? Some bureaucrat in Albany? Or can it not best be decided perhaps by the people whose village has the road? Lewiston, I believe. It makes sense that the people who are local, who are most aware of what is prudent and reasonable, would make the decision, not some bureaucrat at a distance. And of course, the problem we have willy-nilly is the tendency of democratic, republic forms of societies today is that they seem to just automatically roll towards a violation of subsidiarity. They tend to roll just automatically unless you are aggressively espousing and defending very conservative principles. You wind up with liberalism and all that that entails. It's just automatic, because unless people are thinking to resist it, it tends to just be the natural entropy of society. Because after all, look, you create legislative representatives, and what is their job? To pass laws. And gosh, I mean, remember, as far as the United States was concerned, originally they were supposed to be citizen farmers who would go off during the off-season from planting and meet for a couple months and pass a few laws and go home. Well, you know, this idea of career politicians were something unheard of. We had the blessing that our first president absolutely refused to take a third term. And he even insisted that we not refer to him as His Royal Highness. I mean, that's just amazing. How many politicians today would resist that temptation? Given the opportunity, one wonders. But the tendency is always to pass another law. I mean, good grief. You can always see a problem. Somebody sees a problem. You need to pass a law to fix the problem. Well, the difficulty is that you can't pass a law that is sufficiently detailed to take care of every problem. So there are always more problems than there are laws to handle them, unless you use a bit of common sense in the application of the laws. So what do you wind up with? An IRS code that's got 8,000 pages, is it, or 8,000 regulations? Nobody on God's earth knows what the rules are, which of course intimidates the daylights out of the poor taxpayer, which is just where they want you to be. So it's a really delicate balancing act to pass the right number of laws. And nobody's going to tell you, God did, you know, he only had 10 of them. And we had to kind of work out the details, notice? So that was it's all in there. It's all in there, but you have to use some reason to see how it's applied. And you don't write everything out. Some things have to be decided by even policemen who are using prudence and ethics. That's what one hopes for. You may not get it, but the solution isn't to pass laws that detail every possible circumstance. You can't do it.
It's just like the warning labels on a ladder now. When you buy a ladder.
Or the warning labels that when they sell coffee, it has to say, beware, this may be hot and may scald you. Because you remember the case down in Albuquerque where somebody got too hot a cup of coffee and spilled it on themselves. Believe it or not, the possibility is that may have occurred in my father's McDonald's. Because he had the first McDonald's franchise in Albuquerque, New Mexico in 1960. So it may have been the one on Manal Boulevard where it occurred. That's my little connection to history on this point. But there are some points at which you're supposed to have a little full common sense. And you shouldn't have to legislate that people should beware of hot coffee, that it might be hot. Again, of course, I know I've heard the story and they said it was scalding. It was just beyond belief in terms of heat, but so be it. The principle of subsidiarity is supposed to protect you against having overlays of regulation that you have no control over and feel completely helpless before. I remember when Jim Buckley was running for the Senate for the first time in New York back in 68. It wasn't, I know it wasn't 1970s exactly, because I ran for that seat in 1974. And he was elected in 70? Yeah, okay, that makes sense. Because he got into trouble. The Conservative Party was planning to run somebody who was well known. And he came out and was the first senator to suggest that President Nixon resign, at which point, since the Conservative Party gets half of its support from outside the state, it just stopped completely. So they were going to try to run another conservative to actually take the seat. And when they totally ran out of money, they turned to me. And even at that, it didn't go through for reasons we won't go into the details. So our good counselor here, Tom, knows the details. If you can remember that far back. Yes. But I remember that Senator Buckley had come through and was giving some talks, and he mentioned that one of the problems with Washington is that when you take $1 and you send it to Washington, it, at that time, this is 40 years ago, went through something like 40 layers of agencies before it came back to you. And when you got it back, I think you got something like 25 cents out of your $1. That's all the rest stayed in Washington, paying all those bureaucrats' salaries. This is not highly efficient. And that was 40 years ago. You're lucky today if you get back 2 cents. Well, in fact, what you're getting back is added debts for you and your children and your children's children to pay back. That's what you get back. But this is the problem with having too many layers of bureaucracy, as they say. But the general principle that's being violated is that you never should have, and it's based on individual autonomy. It's based on the dignity of the person, the dignity of the individual, and the freedom of the individual, that if you can do something for yourself, you should do it. It's better for you. It's a greater perfection and recognition of your dignity as a human being than if somebody were to do it for you. That, unfortunately, is what happens, of course, is when we get older, if we become disabled or something, people have to start doing things for us. Most people don't want that. But when it comes to government, they want the government to do everything for them. But this is the basic principle. So if you can take care of your own house, take care of it. Government shouldn't have to come in and take care of it for you. The government shouldn't have to come in and brush your teeth for you. I mean, unfortunately, some people get to that point, but the principle is you should have the autonomy of taking care of your own basic living skills and requirements. And what you can't do simply for yourself, of course, then you may live in a village or a town. And of course, we find that it is more helpful. People band together. It's nice to have common water supplies. At least for some reason, people think so. And so if you're in a village, you may get hooked up to the water system. It's nice to have a common electric supply. I mean, we can't all have our own individual power company. I know they would tell you to put solar panels all up, but that doesn't work too well, especially on cloudy days. So in order to gain the benefits of especially modern technology, it is necessary and useful for people to band together in small governmental units to provide certain public works and certain common goods that would otherwise not be attainable for the absolute individual. So, and this is where you get the basic unit of a town or a village. Now, sometimes the argument goes that an individual village or town can't quite handle all of its problems by itself. It may not be able to have enough tax revenue to support a sufficient library or a hospital system or a police department, or so therefore you band some of them together, and ultimately you may form a county. You may have therefore a county sheriff. And the argument is you keep building these units as you get up to the level of a state and ultimately a federal government for the entire country. But at every level, you want to keep things as low as possible, as simple as possible, maintain as much freedom as possible. This is not a matter of politics. This is a matter of ethics. This is a matter of respecting individual autonomy, individual freedom, and yet banding together enough to provide for the common good, to defend the common good. The idea of having absolutely total autonomy in this world doesn't work. You may remember, some of you, back in the 1970s or 80s, I think it was, some free market libertarian types thought, we'll start our own country. And so they went off somewhere in Polynesia and bought themselves an island, declared themselves an independent state, and started coining gold, which was a good idea. And everything was just going swimmingly for them. It was a wonderful idea until some native tribesman from some neighboring island came over with a bunch of AK-47s and destroyed them all. Because in this world, if you are not a major country or a protectorate of a major country, you can have the local pirates just take you over. As you know, off the Horn, is it, of Africa, the east coast of Africa, there are the Somali pirates. They're just out of control. You just don't, even large sailing vessels, even freighters get attacked by these guys, and they take hostages. So this is why, yes, you do have to have governmental systems at the highest level that will conduct military protection for the citizens, that will maintain order in the face of total rioting and revolution, that will conduct foreign policy on behalf of everybody, because you can't have the governor of New York doing foreign policy for the whole United States. You can't have the mayor of Niagara Falls doing foreign policy for the whole of the United States. So you see, it is a balance. And guess what? It's not written down in the Ten Commandments. It isn't all written down in your ethics textbook. It's something where good people of good mind, good judgment, and prudence are supposed to get together and work these things out in conformity with natural law. And it's an ongoing work. You can't say ahead of time, this is how many laws you need. But whenever you're going to pass a law, you always have to ask yourself, is the burden of passing this law going to be greater in a regulatory fashion on the citizenry than the good which the law seeks to address? Because if it doesn't, you shouldn't pass the law. You should live with whatever inconvenience you have by not having the law. And recognize, good grief, the United States existed for 150 years without much of the legislation that's come down the pike in the last half century. How did it do it? Was it not doing well? I'm not saying there aren't some things that we needed, but we were functioning fairly well with far, far, far fewer laws than we have today. And of course, the problem is today we have so many laws we don't know how to get all the sardines back in the can. How do you undo it? How do you back off from having 8,000 pages of IRS regulations? Really. I know we've got proposals to just reduce it to a 3x5 card where you say, I earned $50,000 and I pay 20% and that's it. The problem we have is you got to convince the politicians to do away with the tax system. Now, why wouldn't they want to simplify it? People often forget that you'd think, well, the tax system, what does it do? It supports the government. We have to have it, right? But what we forget is it has two functions. One function is to support the public works. The other function is to manipulate human behavior. It is. Because there's always somebody in Washington who says to himself, you know, there's too many people not going to college. So we're going to make a condition such that those who go to college will receive certain grants, and those who go to college will receive certain tax benefits. And before you know it, you're getting incentivized in order to go to college. Now that may be a good thing, but how about the idea that you should be very careful not to endanger other species? We don't want people just rampantly going out and annihilating other species, especially when we're only one of them. And so what do? You have things like the snail darter being protected, even if it is at the cost of many human beings losing their jobs. I forget what my whole point was here, but I'm sure it was a good one.
The two purposes of taxes.
Oh yeah, the two purposes of taxes. Because clearly, you can use the power of taxation to destroy, can't you? And so if you're doing things we don't like you to do, we'll fine you. We'll tax you. We'll regulate you. We'll run you out of existence. If coal is producing too many effluents, bothering the atmosphere too much, we'll eliminate coal. And of course, we were promised by our president that when he took office, the cost of your electric energy would go through the roof. And it's already starting to do it. And you can thank the concerns of politicians in Washington that they want to have a clean air environment, even if you can't turn on your air conditioner to survive in it. So the idea of getting rid of your taxation and complexities and reducing them to a 3x5 card, don't hold your breath, because it means all those politicians in Washington have to give up the immense power that they have through those committees to enact legislation that will enable them to control your behavior and my behavior, and of course probably get their wallets fattened a little bit in the process by means you'll never find out about. Okay, any questions about subsidiarity before we get on to that amazing page that's coming up? Go to page 42. Somehow when I see this page, I always think of multi-legged creatures. Actually, I'm glad you have it, because I didn't invent this. I'm not even sure Dr. Waters did. I suspect Father Woodbury might be responsible for it. Is that right? I think it is. But it's a very clever thing that he's done, because what he's done is to look at the nature of man. Look on the left-hand side there. We're talking about the nature of man and civil society. On the left-hand side, you see we have man, and under it we have the rational, the sensitive, and the vegetative. Well, those are the three levels of powers that you find within a human being. The vegetative powers of nutrition, growth, and reproduction, the sensitive powers, the 5 external senses, the 4 internal senses, the sense appetites, the passions. Then you come up to the rational, and you've got the intellect, technically 2 intellects, the agent and passive intellect, and the will. And these are some 17 or so powers that we find within the human being. And those powers are designed, if you look at the way the arrows work here, I will take credit for having drawn the arrows. That's about all that I did. But you see how the solid lines mean for the sake of. So the sensitive and the vegetative powers, if you follow the line upward, are for the sake of really the rational powers and ultimately speculation. In other words, the maintenance of life and health and sensory awareness on the part of the human being, all of this aims to enable us to live the life of the mind. That's what it's really about. We're not pure minds, but to really be human, you're living the life of the mind. That's the purest part of you, the part that purelessly distinguishes you from lower beasts. And so, in a very real sense, all these lower powers, these vegetative, sensitive, these organic powers, serve the rational. And ultimately, the highest is the speculative powers, which enable us to ask, where did we come from and where are we going? Does there exist some ultimate cause of the world? Am I required to live an ethical life? How can I enjoy the finer things in life in terms of understanding art and poetry and music and literature? These are the speculative things in philosophy and theology which distinguish us and perfect us as human beings and really ultimately define us so radically from the state of the chimps that nobody even suggests that they should compete with us at that level. You know, they raise questions about, well, do they have language like we do? Forget it. Do they have universities like we do? Okay, let's take off the gloves and deal with them directly. No way. So that's ultimately the perfection of being a human being. That we don't, I realize a lot of people do just, sit on their couch for the whole of their life, drinking beer and watching three-ring circuses. But that's not the ultimate purpose of human existence. But in order to be able to have the leisure to do these finer things, and you may remember that famous book by Joseph Pieper, Leisure, the Basis of Culture. Yeah. I mean, when people were trying to keep the fire going in the caves, and some of them were for a while, whether you believe in evolution or not, because we got the caves, you really didn't have much time. You were out trying, struggling to survive. Once we got tossed out of the Garden of Eden, it wasn't so easy to do our gardening. And therefore, you just didn't have the time, didn't have the availability of leisure. It was only when culture and civilization began to develop that you were able to have people like Plato go strolling around under the trees talking to these young men that were contemplating the purpose of life. Couldn't really be done before. So we need to use reason in the practical sense, the practical powers, to enable us to master our environment to the point at which we would be able to have the time to really be fully human by having the leisure with which to be fully human and to live the speculative life. Not everybody wants to do that, I realize, but in a very real sense, somebody should be doing it, and somebody should be guiding society who has done it. That's why Plato talks about the philosopher king. I'm not saying this has necessarily been workable in practice, but the idea was, who knew best what everything was about except the philosopher, the lovers of wisdom? And they were the ones who were to create the perfect city-state and to be the rulers of it, the people who guided it. Now, of course, he had some rather peculiar notions in his Republic as to how it was to be guided, so maybe Plato himself would not have been the best philosopher king. But the basic idea is you don't necessarily want Joe down at the local tavern running the entire country. On the other hand, sometimes you might prefer him. It depends on who's running it.
We have a mayor that did that. We always keep kidding about Griffin and Fury.
Oh, look, we had a mayor in Boston who was running the city out of the prison that he was in. I can't remember, like the 1940s. He was actually in prison, and while he was serving his time, he was running the city. So I think his time wasn't too bad. I can't remember his name. It was before my time. It was Curly. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, we all have to go down in history for something. You're on Jeopardy next week. Now, if you look to the right of the page now you can understand what was going on when Father Woodbury applied this to society as a whole, because corresponding to the vegetative, the lowest, is the body economic, because it basically keeps things going. If you have no economy that functions, everybody's in a state of poverty and starving to death, you can't have a society that's going to work. In order to keep the people healthy, you need the body recreative. That basically means the idea is people have to be able to live well, to be healthy, to engage in sports, stay in good shape, so that the people are well enough to maintain the body economic. The body economic enables them to have the gym facilities that they need to stay well. And then the whole point of this is to support, follow the hard line all the way up to the top, the body cultural, which ultimately is concerned with the common good. The common good ultimately being the enjoyment of the beautiful, the contemplation of the things that are better. But we listed some of the lesser common goods like peace and justice and well-informed public opinion. Those belong to the common good. But the ultimate common good would be to encourage the people, all the people that you can, to contemplate the purposes of life and to contemplate the most beautiful things that are available to us as human beings. Now, the common goods which serve that underneath belong to the body politic. The body politic, in other words, the political system, has to assure that we have peace and order and friendship so that we can have philosophy classes in peace. And indeed, how could you have a philosophy class? I mean, we've got air conditioning, we've got a roof over our heads, we have lighting, we have peace, nobody comes in ready to kill anybody else. We're not in the post office or anything. So this is an application, it's an analogy, it's a parallel between the powers within the human being and the various divisions that should occur within society so as to analogously serve all of the purposes that are proper to human existence, only writ large in the population as a whole. Okay, anybody got any questions on that, or did we survive going through it? Now, point number 2, the body recreative, of course, its purpose is good physical health, but also good mental health. I mean, it's good to have a nation of citizens who are mentally healthy. And that, of course, really means you don't want them strung out on drugs, obsessed with pornography, and so forth. I mean, we're talking about people who are genuinely healthy are not going to be subject to all of these maledictions that so often obsess society and drag it down into the dregs. But we are rational animals, and that's why we introduce rational rules. That's the purpose of governance, that we legislate through laws. But the laws have to be rational, and rational means reasonable, and reasonable means in accordance with human nature and never in violation of the natural ethical law. So how do we do this? We need leaders, God grant them to us, who are prudent, who are ethical, who are virtuous. You don't always get them, but that's the idea. Sometimes you wonder, out of 300 million Americans or 30 million Canadians, why you can't do better. But I guess that's part of the human condition. So what do? We try to induce circumstances within society that will encourage people to be good. I know this is a strange concept, because from a purely libertarian standpoint, you should have the right to be vicious. You should have the right to be as degraded as you want. But one of the chief common goods of natural law for society is that we should encourage people to be virtuous. Now, that doesn't mean that you're going to be dominating them in a completely harsh way, because you really want to educate the populace. That's not to be confused with training. I'm sure you may remember Dr. Waters pointing this out. Educare means to lead. We lead them toward the truth. We lead them towards virtue. That's the purpose of education. You train a dog, but you educate a man. And education, the purpose of education is to lead the young up to being fully compliant citizens who are capable of caring for themselves, who are possessed of all the virtues, prudence, justice, temperance, fortitude, so that they can participate in society successfully. This is a blueprint for a very aggressive agenda, but it must not be an agenda that is imposed in a totalitarian fashion. It is a real art to govern well, to encourage what is good. And it also means one has to bear in mind that evil has no rights. So those who claim rights to do what is actually a vice are not based on sound ground. There is no basis for demanding the right to practice vice or to be vicious. That's not a legitimate right. So we wish to enhance within society freedom, but true freedom is not to be confused with license. License is the abuse of freedom. So there is no obligation to provide funding for people to engage in activities that are not, I don't want to say counterproductive, but which are contrary to nature, contrary to ethics. Remember, in practice, you will get bad effects in society if you don't govern ethically. But you govern ethically because it is ethical to so govern. In other words, what I'm trying to get at is that distinction between the a priori and the a posteriori. A priori, we know that we ought to establish a government according to natural law and encourage virtue and so forth, loyalty, patriotism, fidelity, marriage, constancy. All these things should be encouraged. We know that. Again, I lost where I was going.
Posteriori.
Oh, yeah, thank you. It's very tempting to say a posteriori that if you don't do this, society will be a wreck. And it is, because we don't. You can point to all of the terrible effects that occur from the breakdown of marriage, which arises from not protecting and encouraging people to lead constancy within their marital vows. This is just by the boards. People don't do this today. So now we look at the wreckage of society which has occurred as a result, and we say, well, we must have been doing something wrong. And so many people would argue from a utilitarian standpoint, and they're right, that you've got to go back and you should undo these things and fix what we did wrong. But the reason that we did them wrong in the first place is because we listened too much to those who said we ought to have the freedom to do things that are not right. We ought to have the freedom to have pornography on television, basically. We ought to have the freedom to have it very easy to obtain divorce. We ought to have the freedom to engage in recreational drugs. And these are not legitimate freedoms. And as a result, we now, after the fact, see that what has been done that is terrible as a result. But had we paid attention a priori to how we were governing ourselves, we would not have to be living through these horrible results. And of course, in many cases, you don't see the results till you get to them. And that's why whenever they want to pass laws, say to legalize abortion, they will assure you that this will make abortion safe, legal, and rare, right? And after we have 50 million children in the United States murdered in the womb or even out of the womb, we now go back and realize, well, it didn't exactly make it rare, did it? And it didn't even make it safe, not only for the children, but for the mothers. It didn't turn out that way. The abortuaries turned out not to be healthy places to have your child murdered. But again, we didn't need to go through all this had we paid attention to natural law in the first place. So yes, we do need leadership that is developed to protect society, to encourage virtue within society, and that's why we we teach people games where we teach them to be fair, not to cheat. And that's why, even in his own way of looking at it, Napoleon said the wars of Europe were won on the playing fields of Eton. Why? Because it was the young gentlemen playing on those playing fields at Eton who learned how to play, who learned how to follow the rules, who learned how to do it well, much to Napoleon's chagrin, eventually. Page 43. Pertaining to the body politic. We've been over this before, but let's look at it again. We're concerned with common goods as opposed to public goods. Not to be confused. Common goods are things like the love of friendship, justice, order, peace, good education, academic freedom properly understood, respect for institutions. None of these are physical. These are all spiritual goods. You can't drag any of them out of a drawer and look at them or weigh them on a scale. But by golly, they're important. Where do you see education? You meet an educated person, but even then you can't see the education, can you? You simply know, remember, we learn the nature of something by observing its activities. If a person is educated just by having them talk to you, you begin to see the depths or lack of depth of their education. But it isn't something that you can actually see. We say we measure it, but it's not that you're measuring it quantitatively, but you're quantifying the results of the answers they give, say, to questions. But the quantity isn't on their education as such. You really can't measure that. So, but education, we need a well-educated public opinion, or well-educated society. And that's why, of course, as you hear some people talk about the dumbing down of society. It's a scary thing. If you have 50 or 60 years of some of John Dewey's worst effects dumbing down society, you have people who can't even serve intelligently in a jury, much less figure out who to vote for. I mean, in some cases, you look at the situation on a voting situation and you ask, how can it even be halfway? How can it be 50-50? Where the principles ought to be very clear. But it is 50-50 because a lot of people are very confused. A lot of people have adopted principles that are perhaps either untrue or unethical. I mean, one of the principles being the gross violation of the principle of subsidiarity. The government ought to do everything for me, so I'll vote for the guy who promises the most to me. See? Is that ethical? No, it's a way of robbing the taxpayer to give to the tax receiver. That doesn't mean that there aren't legitimate purposes for taxation. It doesn't mean that there are not legitimate functions for having a public safety net. But it does mean that when people start getting tempted to say that there should be not a chicken in every pot, but a Cadillac in every garage, that maybe this is unsustainable. And how ironic, as I think I pointed out in the previous class, that of all places, it is the great birthplace of philosophy itself, Athens and Greece, that we should see the ultimate results of socialism gone mad. That the welfare state, the road to serfdom has been attained, and they're all becoming serfs. And our great worry is that we too shall join them soon, because we've adopted the same violation of the principle of subsidiarity. We've let the government do everything for us to the point that people now believe that government itself is somehow productive when it produces nothing. Private enterprise produces things, but you know this sort of thing already. But how ironic. Greece, of all places. Good. The public goods, of course, are things like the armament of the armies, the buildings for the libraries and the courts, the books in the buildings. Those are the public goods. They are material. They are not spiritual. And they are the things, of course, that you do have to have taxes for, to pay for. And then finally, you have private goods, what you own, what I own individually. And that's something we have to be very cautious about, not allowing the government to take too much of what we have. In fact, the whole concept, think about it for a second. What is a tax? We've managed to sugarcoat it so that you don't even know you're being taxed. Isn't that remarkable? It should be every time you have a tax that you have to reach in your pocket, take the money out, hand it to somebody. If you had to do that every time, you wouldn't be so quick to vote for more taxation or more public works that will require taxation. Oh no, we have automatic withholding. You don't even feel it. You don't even see it. You know, at the end of the year, you may even have to pay more. And then we come up with things like in Europe where they have a value-added tax where you don't even know what's happening. You know, every step of the manufacturing process adds another little bit to the cost. So taxation is a very stealthy thing. In fact, it's almost, you begin to suspect, I mean, if they're doing it in such a way that you don't even know you're being taxed, what do we call that? You know, I reach in your pocket and you don't know that it's being picked. There are names for these things. This ought to be right up front. It ought to be, you know, they walk up to you and cut off your thumb. You know it's leaving. Subpoint A, the total of all private goods does not equal common goods or public goods. They're incommensurate in two different orders of reality, plain and simple. Point number B, and this is important, it is not the function of government to be concerned directly about our private goods. Now that doesn't mean that we should let people starve to death, but I would point out that once upon a time there was such a thing as private charity. And people often fail to realize that, at least in America and Canada, private charity is huge. The amount that people give privately to care for others is amazing. Government doesn't necessarily have to be in this picture, and the more that government takes it over, the less private charity you're going to have. And it's far more virtuous for people to voluntarily give of their goods for others. I mean, just look when you have something like Hurricane Katrina. Immediately you have fundraising that just goes off the scales. Good Lord, look at this poor woman up in Rochester that had these children pick on her, and somebody put on Facebook that they should raise a little bit of money so she could take a vacation, thinking she'd get $5,000. Well, within a couple days, she has $300,000 donated. What's she going to do with it? How much is it now?
$550,000.
It's up to $550,000. So, I mean, this is enough to make you want to have a bad day at the office. I'm sure she's not worried right now so much about the bad time on the bus. But directly speaking, it isn't up to government to determine how wealthy you shall be or how wealthy you shall not be. And it isn't the function of government to make sure that you don't get too wealthy. That's not the business of government. It isn't the business of government to say, you've made your first $1 million and that's the last one you're ever going to make. And yet we have a mentality to say, you know, soak the rich. Little tiny reminder that when the income tax was initially passed, it was passed, when was it, 1913, something like that? And they said, guaranteed, you know, the only people that are going to be taxed are the very, very, very richest people, the top 1%. Nobody's ever going to pay another dime in taxes. We swear to you. This is the old principle of, you know, you don't let them get the foot in the door. If you have one violation of a principle, there is no principle. If the principle is we're not going to tax you, then you don't tax anybody. If you tax one person, there is no safeguard, there's no principle, there's no universal. And, you know, I can remember even in 1950, when the average income, my brother-in-law was earning something like $2,000 as a teacher. His taxes at the time were something like $20. That seems kind of reasonable. Of course, what do we have today? We have an earned income tax credit whereby if you're earning less than $30,000 or so and you have a couple children and a wife, the government pays you instead of you paying taxes. But that's not called welfare, that's called an earned income tax credit. You know, it's fascinating what you can do with all these things by the manipulation of the language so as to create everybody having a feeling that the system is perfectly equitable, fair, and rational, when it's anything but rational, and certainly not fair. C, relating to wholes. We have a distinction between collective ownership and distributive ownership. Collectively, you don't own the roads. You distributively, you can sell it. In other words, it's your piece of property. You own the house that you may own, you own the property that's on, and you can sell it. But you can't sell the road in front of your house because that belongs to the town. See, that's held in common. You may pay taxes to support the library, and you can calculate how much of the revenue you're paying, but that doesn't allow you to go steal that many books out of the library, see? Because those things are owned collectively. They are owned as a whole. Point D, roads are owned by people, taken collectively, not distributively, therefore I cannot sell my share of the roads. Point E, this is off topic a little bit, but it is a very important point, and that is anybody, we're talking about these common goods, anybody who attacks the common good is attacking the very unity and the existence of society. Go back up to the top there on the upper right-hand part of that page. If somebody attacks justice, that hurts everybody. It hurts the whole system. It hurts the whole of society. If somebody attacks love of friendship, in other words, if somebody starts bullying people, or if somebody starts carrying a gun around and shooting people, well, that's kind of extreme, but obviously the whole society suffers. Peace and order, the more that we contribute to these common goods, the better. The more that we promote and support order and peace, the better for everybody and the better for you individually and for me individually. The more that there's peace, can you have too much peace? Genuine peace, genuine justice. You can't have too much of it. It's a per se good. So these common goods are shared by everybody. Everybody gains by promoting them. Nobody loses by promoting them. And anybody who attacks them attacks everybody collectively and individually. Anybody who attacks the common good attacks the unity and the very existence of society. So these things may be spiritual, non-material, but they are critical for the very survival of society. Consider the well-informed public opinion that isn't listed there. That's a biggie. You know, that means why? The founding fathers thought it so important that they made it, what is it, First Amendment? Free press, freedom of the press, so that they can tell the people the truth. Isn't that wonderful? Don't we wish they did? You know, you got to have been born out behind the corn husks today not to realize it isn't true. As one editor, former editor of the New York Times said, their masthead should read all the news that fits. We've had this thing with Fast and Furious going on for months, where they've been selling guns, importing them, I'm saying this for purposes of people a couple years down the road, sending it into Mexico, and the guns are coming back, and they had one of our own agents killed by the gun. And big scandal. It's gone all the way up to executive privilege on the part of President Obama being asserted, with Congress trying to find out what's going on and the Justice Department not wanting them to have full transparency in the most transparent administration of all time. And what was I talking about? The
attack of unity.
Oh yeah. The problem is we've had how long's it been going on? Like a year and a half? And then I think somebody noted that it was covered by, was it NBC, only 10 minutes of coverage? 10 minutes of coverage in a year and a half? Virtually little or no coverage by the main ABC, CBS, and NBC? All this time? And the only time it finally is being covered is because Congress is about to cite for contempt the Attorney General of the United States, and they can't sit on it anymore. So well-informed public opinion presumes that journalists are committed and dedicated to really informing the public in an honest way. If they don't do that, they are attacking the common good. They are undermining the unity and the very existence of the government. A democracy can work only if the people know what's going on. And again, point F, the more that we give to the common good, the more that we get out of it. Okay, I think we've run out of time tonight. Thank you.
Sound production copyright, Olteen Library Services, 2013. All rights reserved. www.aquinasphilosophy.com.